What is the latest with Iran? We're going to talk about it, and we are also going to talk about the ways that our government is trying to gaslight us into a war. So let's go ahead and get started. Defense Secretary Mark Esper just gave a press conference. Let's go through some of the things he said and some of the realities. We need to face some hard realities here. So let's start. He says, the United States is not seeking a war with Iran, but we are prepared to finish one. What does this mean? The United States is not seeking a war with Iran? Because it sure looks like it. When you take out a nation's top general, what do you call that? If they did that to us, if they were to take out our Secretary of State, our director of the CIA, our vice president, how would we react? Because I'm pretty sure we would turn around and say, this is an act of war. So clearly what we did was an act of war. We knew it was an act of war. Our administration can't come out and say, well, this was an act of war. We're trying to wage war with Iran. Of course, they're never going to admit it. For one, they didn't have congressional approval, which they must have if they're going to engage in war. And secondly, nobody ever says that they're a warmonger. You know, even all the warmongers that are truly warmongers, they don't really even ever admit it. They always say, well, I don't want war, but, and then they give us a list of reasons why they actually do want war. He then says something very scary when he says, we are prepared to finish one. What does that mean? That, to me, is the scariest thing that Defense Secretary Mark Esper said throughout the conference today. We are prepared to finish one. Now, we are the only country in the world who's ever dropped a nuclear bomb. We did it twice on the Japanese, and no other country has ever done it since. We need to ask ourselves, is that what this administration would do in order to finish a war that was started between us and Iran? Would it require threatening and even dropping a nuclear weapon? Because I don't know how we are going to engage in a war when Iran has 1 million standing troops. Sure, we have thousands in the Middle East, but we are in their territory, on their land, in their neighborhood, and there's 1 million of them. And that's just the Iranians. That's not to take into consideration the other nations in the Middle East who would join them, and the other nations in the region, perhaps Russia, who would join them. So what does he mean by we are prepared to finish one? Because that's very scary. He says, we are seeking a diplomatic solution, but first, this will require the regime to de-escalate. Again, what does de-escalation look like? Because time after time again, the United States has been the one to escalate the tensions. We were the first to back out of the nuclear deal. Then we put debilitating sanctions on them. Then we took out their top military general. Meanwhile, what has Iran done? So some people say, well, Iran was attacking oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. We have no evidence of that. They denied it. We have no evidence of that. They say, well, they took down one of our drones. Yes, an unmanned drone that went into their airspace. And they say, oh, well, they were capturing British oil tankers. Well, the British oil tankers captured the British captured one of their oil tankers. They have been responding, and their response has been proportionate. But make no mistake, it's been a response. Iran has not been the aggressor in this. They have been the defender. They have been the ones to respond to every single one of our aggressions. And that is exactly what this administration is hoping for. They're hoping for a war. They've been wanting a war for many, many decades. John Bolton has been really looking for a war with Iran forever. Israel's been looking for a war with Iran. Saudi Arabia would like to take out their economic competitor, their economic oil competitor. So this has been a war that people have wanted for a very, very long time. And we have been escalating and escalating, looking for them to respond time and time again. And we're hoping that they do it again this time. So my question is, what does de-escalation look like? The only thing I can think of is they do nothing. But with them doing nothing, we're going to do something again. And we're going to claim that it's because they did X, Y, Z to us. Right now, the claim has been that they killed an American contractor and they attacked our embassy. Well, the embassy was attacked by Iraqis. These were not Iranians who attacked the embassy. It wasn't the Iranian military. It was Iraqis. Sure, were the Iraqis Shia Muslims? Were they sympathetic to Iran? Yeah. Were they maybe even backed by Iran? Sure. But they were Iraqis. So I want to know what de-escalation looks like. He says this will require them to cease their malign activities throughout the region. So what he really means is this means allowing us to install governments that we want in the region who will suck the resources from the people in those regions and give those resources to the American corporations. That's what this means. What we're upset about is that Iran has repeatedly throughout the region been able to push back and sort of undermine our efforts to take over. When you look at Iraq, the invasion, we full on admit we invaded Iraq. We invaded the Iranian neighbor. We also went into Afghanistan, so we invaded the two countries right around Iran. They've been able to counter the invasion rather than installing a government that was more pro-American. The Iranians were able to get a government in Iraq that was more pro-Iran, which makes more sense because they're neighbors. I mean, how would we like it if the Mexican government was pro-China and not pro-America? Or if the Canadians were pro-Russia and not pro-America? You want your neighbors to be your friends. And Iran saw an opportunity to install, to help facilitate a government that is more pro-Iran in Iraq, and they succeeded in that against what we would have liked. In Syria, once again, we tried to topple Bashar al-Assad. We tried to get a different government in there that was going to be more pro-American, that would allow us to build the pipelines that we wanted. And instead, Iran and Russia went in and stabilized Syria, kept it under the control of Assad, who is much more friendly to Iran and Russia. When it comes to Lebanon and Palestine with Hamas, there's been all of these efforts that Iran has put out through the region to counter Western influence, to counter the expansion of Israel, to counter Saudi Arabia's growing influence, and they've been successful. And so that is called malign activities throughout the region. We also call that terrorism throughout the region, even though it's just really two big militaries and governments battling it out for control of a region, and they've just done a better job of it. So now we label them terrorists and say they're malign, and obviously we're very upset about this. So he says the American people should know that their safety is in the hands of the strongest and most capable military in the world. Well, you know what? Americans here are safe. Iran is not attacking Americans here. Iran has been attacking American soldiers and contractors who invaded the Middle East. Like I said, we openly admit to invading the Middle East. We call it the invasion of Iraq. And what do you expect is going to happen to invaders? They're not going to be met with ice cream and cookies. They're going to be met with hostility. The people that are there are going to turn around and say, get out. And if you don't get out, we're going to force you out. And that, unfortunately, means death to our American soldiers and our contractors. The person who has blood on their hands for the deaths of the American soldiers and American contractors is George W. Bush. That is the person who marched us into war to begin with. That is the person that put our American soldiers in harm's way in the Middle East. And then it was passed down to Obama, who has blood on his hands for not pulling out of the Middle East, for instead escalating tensions, escalating and ramping up. And now the blood on the hands, the blood is on Trump's hands for continuing to keep our troops in harm's way in the Middle East. We have honorable men and women who have signed up to defend this country, to take part in our military, and they trust that our government, that their commander-in-chief, that the generals at the Pentagon are going to send them to battles that are truly for the benefit of the American people. But unfortunately, when it comes to the Middle East and many regions around the world, our military has sent our soldiers off to battle for corporation profits. And that we need to wake up to this. We've got to wake up to this and say, what does Iran have to do with our day-to-day life here in America? Who really benefits from a war with Iran? It's American corporations who want to maintain oil money. That's what this is about. And we need to be honest about it. There's also others in the region who would like to see Iran taken down. You've got Israel who would like to see Iran taken down because the Iranians have given them a lot of grief with their expansion efforts in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia would like to see Iran taken down because they are oil market competitors. What better than having your oil market competitor totally trashed by the U.S. military? That's why Saudi Arabia buys all of our weapons. In my last video, I mentioned that Saudi Arabia doesn't really have a military. I got a little bit of criticism on that, so I want to clarify. Saudi Arabia buys a lot of weapons. They are actually, I think, the third largest, they own the third largest amount of weapons because they keep buying all of our weapons, but they don't know what to do with those shiny things. They like to buy the shiny things, and then they don't really know what to do with them. They do have a military, but the military is undertrained. A lot of it is just more symbolic, people that are in the military, and they're just friends with the kingdom, with the royal family, but they're really not fighters. They're really not trained. They really buy our weapons knowing that what this means is that American troops are going to have to go over there and actually be the ones to use the weapons and guide the Saudi troops. And it really, they're buying weapons. It's their way of buying our military, buying our support, buying our defense. They can't defend their own oil fields. They can't fight the Houthi fighters, the Houthi rebels down in Yemen. They're an extremely ineffective military, if you want to even call it that, which is why I say they don't really have one. So hopefully that clarifies some things there. So he says American people should know that they're safe and that we have the most capable military in the world. Well, the way to keep our troops safe in the Middle East right now is to get them out. We have not been successful in the region. Look at everywhere we've tried to engage in the region. We have been unsuccessful. In Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, we have been unsuccessful completely. It is just time to get out. He says the men and women of our armed forces should know that we are standing with them and will continue to support them as they meet and overcome today's threats from malign actors, including Iran and its proxy militias. Really? Because keeping them safe would mean not engaging in a war and pulling them out of the region. That's what keeps them safe. Continuing to ask our troops to become an occupying, invading force in a foreign territory is asking for trouble. That's what that means. I don't know how we think in any sort of with any logic that invading other territories and occupying other lands is somehow okay. And that others who then attack us, that, oh my gosh, we're under attack. Americans are under attack when we're an invader. We're an occupier. That doesn't make any sense. He says the architects of terror should know we will not tolerate attacks against America's people and interests and will exercise our right to self-defense should that become necessary. We have to ask ourselves, guys, who is acting in self-defense? We have openly invaded another region of the world. When you invade, you expect that people are going to attack you. So they're the ones defending themselves. Just put it on a small scale in your own home. You're in your house. Somebody comes and takes over your front lawn. What are you going to do? Are you going to just say, oh, let me just, fine, you're welcome to stay. Here, let's have a party. No, of course not. You're going to become hostile. You're going to fight them. You're going to call them invaders. You're going to try to bring in the police. You're going to do everything you can to get these people out of your property. And that is what has gone on in the Middle East. Now, to then could you imagine then people rallying around? And I know many of you who want war with Iran. So those of you who do, let me just ask you this. You were very against the migrant caravans coming up to our southern border. You were saying, oh, these are invaders. We have the right to defend ourselves. And then you were saying liberals were rallying around these migrant people, these migrant invaders, and saying, oh, let them in. They're fine. Stop being so hostile to them. So that now is what's going on over in Iran and in Iraq and just in the Middle East in general, is that now we are the invaders. We've come onto their front lawn, into their homes, and they've asked us to leave, sometimes through the vote of government, like what we saw with Iraq, sometimes through force, like what we see with the groups that are fighting against our American soldiers. And now what you're saying is no, they should accept us and they should even welcome us, the invaders. That's what they should do. And how dare you say otherwise? And them fighting against us is hostile and we have the right to self-defense. Let's at least remain consistent, in our viewpoints. So we have invaded them. They've acted in self-defense. They're acting in self-defense, which is acts of war against us. Us then retaliating is still us being aggressive. That's us being the offensive. We're not on the defensive. We're on the offensive over there. He says the architects of terror should know we will not tolerate attacks. We just went over that. He says we are in Iraq and we are there to support Iraqi forces and Iraqi government become a strong, independent, and prosperous country. But Iraq doesn't want us there. So the Iraqi parliament just did a vote, and they voted to expel the United States from Iraq. They do not want us there. The prime minister is likely to sign this. He hasn't yet, but he's likely to because he's actually the one who wrote the bill. So the Iraqis do not want us there for a variety of reasons. One, they feel like the action of killing the general on their soil was an aggressive act that they condemned. But secondly, the biggest reason is they do not want to be a war zone. We've got our American troops in Iraq. Iran is right there on the border. They do not want to be a war zone. They're trying to rebuild their country. They're trying to become a strong sovereign nation. The last thing they want is for the United States and Iran to engage in war on their soil. They have every right to ask us to leave. Now, we have then turned around and said, we're not leaving. Trump has said, we're going to sanction you and you're not going to like it. It's going to be the worst sanctions that we've ever done if you force us to leave. And then we're going to make you pay us back for these bases that we built that you didn't ask us to build. And we're being very hostile to Iraq now. So what do you call that when we are now an occupying force that's hostile, that's refusing to leave? We are uninvited guests. Is that really us acting like we're the heroes of the world, like we're the good guys? Because that doesn't sound like it. He says, now in regards to that parliamentary vote that Iraq just did, when asked about it, Defense Secretary Mark Esper said that the vote was that those who voted for America to leave voted because their lives were threatened. So now he's just making stuff up. There's no proof of that. The Iraqis are pissed. And now he's saying, well, they're only mad because their lives are at risk. People, Iran is threatening them, and that's why. And he has no proof of this. When are we going to stop being lied to by our government officials? When are we going to say enough is enough? That is, to me, a reason to remove Mark Esper from office. Trump engaging with a war without congressional approval against Iran is an impeachable offense. This is what we should be impeaching him over. This is absolutely impeachable. He is starting a war with a nation without the American people's consent. That's impeachable. Not this whole debacle with Joe Biden exposing Joe Biden, maybe letting his family make a bunch of money off of Ukraine. I mean, this is the thing. He says, so when he was asked if an attack on one of our Middle Eastern allies would be the same as an attack on the U.S., he insinuated that it would. Oh, so that's great. So if they attack Saudi Arabia or Israel or anyone else in the region that we consider one of our allies, then we're going to go to war with Iran. So are we protecting Americans or are we not? He says that we're going to follow international law regarding war crimes. That's good. This is in regards to Trump saying that we're going to target the cultural sites of Iran, which is a war crime. Trump came out saying that we're going to target 52 sites based on the 52 hostages that Iran took back in the 70s. People forget that, we downed an airliner, a passenger airliner that killed 290 Iranian civilians. And does that mean Iran gets to now turn around and say that they're going to target 290 of our cultural sites for every one of the lives that they lost? We didn't lose American hostages. They came home safe. 290 of Iranian civilians on a passenger plane were shot down by U.S. military and they were killed. If we're going to go tit for tat, we got to go tit for tat. So he says the ball is in Iran's court, that it's up to them to de-escalate and to come to the table without precondition and talk about a better way forward, which would include them behaving like a normal country. And again, what he means is allowing us to control the region and them and all of their resources and allow our American corporations to make money off of it. Iran has been supporting militia groups and militaries around the region, trying to defend themselves against Western invaders. That's the way they see it. They see us as hostile Western invaders. They want us to leave, and they have risen up to defend their lands. That's what they've done. I'm not making an excuse for anything. I'm just pointing out the truth. If they came and did that to us and we were defending ourselves, and then they turned around and said, wow, you guys are terrorists for defending yourselves, that doesn't make any sense. So we need to keep everything making sense. He was asked about how killing one of their top generals is our way of de-escalation, and he had absolutely no answer for this, because there is no answer for that. Killing one of their top generals is not a way to bring Iran to the table for peace talks. He says Soleimani was a terrorist leader of a U.S. designated terrorist organization. So the United States has designated Iran's military, a sovereign nation's military, as a terrorist organization, when really it's just a sovereign nation's military. I guess you could classify any military as a terrorist organization. I'm sure many nations around the world would like to classify the United States as a terrorist organization. When you do that, then there's the reason why they would designate the Iranian military as a terrorist organization is not just rhetoric, but also because of law. Then you're allowed to take certain military actions that you cannot take against a sovereign nation, but you can take it if you deem it a terrorist organization. But the reality is Iran is not a terrorist organization, and neither is their military. And, the rhetoric and the gaslighting is insane. You've got Mike Pence, who tried to gaslight the American people over Twitter, saying that Iran was responsible somehow for 9/11. We know that 9/11 was an act that was committed by Sunni Wahhabists that were Saudi Arabians. These are people who are completely ideologically, religiously, fundamentally at odds against Iran and the Shia Muslims of Iran. The Wahhabi Sunnis are, they commit a lot of acts of jihad against Americans. They call us infidels. But you know who they hate more than they hate Americans or Westerners? Shia Muslims. That is number one on their list of who they hate. So to think that these Shia Muslims in Iran would somehow collaborate with these Sunni Wahhabists from Saudi Arabia who absolutely want to chop off their head doesn't make any sense, and it's just gaslighting. It's just trying to get the American people to not know the difference between the various different factions and sects and branches of Islam, and just bizarre. Our leaders, they should be impeached for lying to us in this way, for completely trying to gaslight us. Iran has ended the nuclear deal completely. They know that they're facing war now. They know that the United States has no intentions of letting them off the hook with war. We have tried to escalate and escalate and escalate and get them to retaliate at every single turn since backing out of the Iran nuclear deal. They know this. Now the writing is on the wall for them, and I think now they're saying we better get our hands on a nuke. That is the way to stay safe. Unfortunately, in this world that we live in, if you want to be safe, you want to remain as a sovereign nation, then you need to get your hands on a nuke, because that's the only way that you're going to stay safe from American invasion. They saw what happened around the world in Libya and Iraq, and they see they're not stupid. So they've ended the Iran nuclear deal. They're likely going to get their hands on a nuke very, very quickly. And then we're going to say, well, we can't let them have weapons of mass destruction. And guys, we're just seeing Iraq all over again. This is an absolute mistake. We cannot allow this to happen. The Iranians, it's a very different group of people than the Iraqis and than people in Afghanistan. This will not go well. This will not end well. This is a mistake. This is a disaster. We have failed in the Middle East. It is time to get out. We have too many interests in oil. It comes down to American corporations. We really do need to end our reliance on oil. That will help us get out of the Middle East. That will help us end the wars. We do need to focus on America first, like Trump promised. We need to focus on a Green New Deal to get us out of this oil dependence. We need to sever the ties that the dollar has to the oil markets, the petrodollar. We need to sever those ties, and we need to pin it to something else, something that we can control without having to go and enact war and hostilities in foreign lands. This is just an absolute nightmare. So that is the latest with what is going on. It's escalating, it's rising, and we're just going to see a repeat of the Iraq war and weapons of mass destruction narratives to get us to march ourselves into a longer prolonged conflict in the Middle East. This is a disaster. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate your support. My last video on Iran was demonetized, and when that happens, that's very stressful for me financially, and I do appreciate many of you have sent in some donations, and I can't thank you enough for that, to be honest with you, because if I'm going to continue to talk about this, if I'm going to continue to report on this, then it's important that I am able to survive and function and maintain. So I appreciate all the support that you've given me. Hopefully not all of my Iran videos will be demonetized. Many of them have not, so I'm hopeful, and you'll know because you'll see the commercials, or you won't see the commercials. So again, thank you so much for your support. The links are down below. More to come, unfortunately, when it comes to our escalating tensions with Iran.